Good morning and welcome to Arise News Now. I'm Gavin Ramjohn in London. It's Monday the 29th of July. And our top story at this hour, in Italy, at least 38 people have died after a coach carrying pilgrims plunged off a motorway flyover in southern Italy. Another 11 people were injured in what is already one of the worst coach accidents in Europe in recent years. The coach was taking about 50 people, including children, back to Naples after a pilgrimage. It crashed into several cars before plunging over the barrier. The cause of the accident is not clear. This morning, supporters of deposed Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi have started marching from their Cairo vigil to the military intelligence headquarters, ignoring a warning from the army to steer clear of military facilities. Meanwhile, hundreds joined a funeral procession for a supporter of Morsi who died on Sunday, along with 72 other Morsi loyalists, as his Muslim Brotherhood movement says it will stand its ground. Mana Rabi reports.
In this Egyptian mosque east of Cairo on Sunday, Ahmed Said Ahmed was laid to rest. The 25-year-old medical student was among some 72 people killed Saturday in clashes between police and supporters like him of ousted President Mohamed Morsi. His mother blames his death on Army Chief General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and his supporters.
Whoever went down on Friday with Sisi, they are the ones who killed my son. Sisi, the church, and every person in Egypt that said yes to Sisi, they're all the ones that killed my son.
In a central Cairo square, thousands of Morsi supporters, activists in the Muslim Brotherhood, remained hunkered down on Sunday in what's become an ongoing vigil. The Interior Ministry is in talks with the military about clearing out this pro-Morsi sit-in, but demonstrators here vow to stand their ground.
If they want to clear out the square, there are a million martyrs in front of them.
Morsi's supporters are protesting what they call a military coup. They say they won't back down until Morsi, Egypt's first democratically elected leader, is put back into power.
Well, Erica Aisha Chavez is a Cairo-based current affairs blogger and has been following the weekend's events in Egypt. We'll cross to her live. Erica, the clashes and tension then spreading right through the weekend. What have you seen on the streets of Cairo?
Well, a few days ago we saw that people were coming out en masse to support the military. The military requested that people show that they came out against terrorism and violence, sort of to give them perhaps like a blank check to take care of the Muslim Brotherhood if need be. And people came out in really large numbers to do so. Now, shortly after that, they started clashes in the morning with the Muslim Brotherhood. No one knows who started it. Everyone has a different side. But either way, over 100 were killed.
The interim president has granted powers to the army to arrest people now. What is the Muslim Brotherhood feeling about this?
Well, technically, the army has always sort of had this power to arrest. It's just, I guess, been put at the forefront at this time. And they've been arresting the Muslim Brotherhood since the beginning of July. So that's something that they've become used to over the course of this month. I don't think they're going to be surprised.
The Interior Minister, Mohammed Ibrahim, says that protesters will be dispersed soon. Is that likely to happen?
Yes, they're trying to do it by sort of indirect means. They've stated at first that neighbors of Rab al-Adawiyya Mosque, where they're collecting, have filed complaints, which is understandable because there's not really garbage pickup there. They don't have sufficient restrooms to take care of how many people are there. There's a sort of noise and scent complaints at the camp there.
Some criticism, of course, has been levelled at people within the country and inside the country and from outside as well. John Kerry, the US Secretary of State, getting in on there too. What is the pressure there on the authorities to stop this violence?
I think that's the job of the international community to hold people accountable to standards of human rights. Now, when it comes to the Muslim Brotherhood, perhaps the government has the ability to suppress them violently, but I think with all of the world watching, they can't do that. They'll have to stick by certain standards. And the army has stated this morning in flyers that they dropped over Rab al-Adawiyya that they don't have any intention of harming people, that they want to protect people in Rab al-Adawiyya, but they also want to call them to stick with nonviolence.
And what can you tell us about the flyers that you received and have heard about in the country as well?
They were dropped this morning shortly after morning prayer, and they basically read that the military was asking people to stick with nonviolence, reminding them that there were people who would engage in anarchy and breaking the rules. So they are just trying to tell people, don't go near army, don't go near these army installations, which they're not camped very far from. So they're telling them to sort of stay in their place. And what would happen if they didn't is not listed. They try to sort of give it a really rosy kind, the military's your friend, please just be nice and use your voice.
And Erica, finally, what's the atmosphere like on the ground where you are?
Well, anytime you go out in Cairo right now, Cairo is a really congested city. There's millions of people here, so it always takes a while to get somewhere. But right now it takes doubly long because there are tanks closing down every street. We were out last night in Roxy, the district that Ittihadiyya Palace, the presidential palace, is in. And my favorite coffee shop overlooks tanks in the street. And there's young people and families going up to the tanks, taking pictures with military men who are holding large weapons. So this is becoming something that we see in every corner in Cairo, particularly in major locations. But people are still going out about their daily lives.
Erica Chavez, interesting to hear. Thanks very much for that. Now, ballot counting is underway in Mali after voters turned out in large numbers over the weekend for presidential elections. The voters are looking for a fresh start after more than a year of turmoil, war and army coup in the West African nation. Despite calls for a delay by some local politicians and several prominent NGOs, Mali forged ahead with elections that the international community had been calling for as a condition to release nearly $4 billion pledged in aid and assistance. Election observers said that 96% of the polling stations had opened on time and that the turnout was high. Unless a candidate wins more than 50% of the vote, a second round of runoff elections will follow on the 11th of August. The driver of the deadly train accident last week in Spain, which killed 79 people, admitted that he was reckless whilst driving in a court hearing in Santiago de Compostela. Francisco Garzón has been under arrest since Thursday and has now been released pending trial on charges of reckless homicide. Garzón admitted taking the train too fast through a tight curve, which is believed to have caused the accident. A memorial service for the victims of the crash will be held in Santiago de Compostela's cathedral later this evening. Palestinian and Israeli negotiators will resume peace talks in Washington today, the US State Department has confirmed. It follows months of diplomacy by US Secretary of State John Kerry. The statement came hours after Israel approved the release of more than 100 Palestinian prisoners. Arise News' Adrian Smith reports.
Peace talks between Israeli and Palestinian negotiators will resume in Washington, D.C. this week, the State Department announced Sunday. US Secretary of State John Kerry will meet senior aides to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas Monday evening in the first round of talks in nearly 3 years. The agreement to return to talks comes after Kerry made 6 trips to the region in the past 4 months. The talks were finalised after the Israeli cabinet on Sunday approved the release of 104 Palestinian prisoners. It's unclear how the United States hopes to bridge the core issues in the dispute, including borders, the future of Jewish settlements on the West Bank, the fate of Palestinian refugees and the status of Jerusalem. Adrian Smith, Arise News.
In Zimbabwe, the end of the campaign trail is in sight. There's just 2 days to go until the country goes to the polls on Wednesday. Earlier in the year, incumbent President Robert Mugabe signed a new constitution enshrining the impartiality of state media and the freedom of speech. But there hasn't been enough time to implement the reforms. According to the African Union, there have been irregularities in the run-up to the election. The 89-year-old Mugabe once again faces his political rival, Morgan Tsvangirai, who's been in a fractious coalition with since the last election in 2008. Well, let's now cross to our man in Johannesburg, Shahan Ramkissoon. Shahan, how important are these elections to go smoothly in the country?
Well, everybody's watching Zimbabwe this time around, especially since they have a new constitution in place. And, everyone's watching to see if it's going to be free and fair. But, Gavin, I'll tell you what, the MDC has come out claiming that there are already irregularities during the special vote and that there are acts of intimidation. Now, they have been backed up by another organization, Good Governance Africa, who's issued a statement today saying that they do not believe the Zimbabwean elections will be free and fair because they themselves, as observers, have witnessed that many people are being intimidated when it comes to voting.
And Shahan, what is the relationship like on the campaign trail between Mr. Mugabe and Mr. Tsvangirai?
Well, Robert Mugabe has gone out since earlier last month on his campaign trail, of course, quite vocal about him being elected president for another term. He says to many of his supporters, some 20,000 words earlier on in the month, that this was a battle for survival. So he's come out saying that he wants to be elected again. And of course, he's going back to the past, which is what Robert Mugabe has done in various campaigns, saying that he was the first black leader in Zimbabwe. He fought off British rule and he should be elected president again. Whereas Morgan Tsvangirai, of course, he's focusing on how to create jobs. He's trying to lure voters by the promise of jobs, also saying that he will create a good environment for foreign investors and that he will see a better Zimbabwe entirely. So two different campaign trails on that part.
And are there fears that the country's economy could slump, as we've seen before, if there are any fallout from these elections?
What's quite interesting is that during this time, many organizations are reporting that the shelves in Zimbabwe shops are really full. You can get anything from Haagen-Dazs to Cape Town cookies, which is quite rare in South Africa alone. So people are saying that the economy seems to be on the up, but there are fears that it could slump during elections if there is acts of intimidation and more violence. Of course, we'll have to wait and see exactly how it pans out and plays out. While the intimidation reports are now currently happening, the MDC has also said that one of its leaders have been arrested already. So it doesn't look like it's going to be going very well during that time. But yes, the economy will take a knock if there are acts of violence and intimidation during the election on Wednesday.
Thanks very much, Shahan. Traditionally a time of fasting and feasting for many Yemenis, this year's Ramadan feasts are becoming too expensive. Yemen has remained the poorest country in the Arab world, and since the country's political turmoil in 2011, in which President Ali Abdullah Saleh was deposed, things have become even worse.
These are members of the private Yemeni association Hemmet Shabab, Arabic for youthful energy. The association and their 1,500 volunteers are mobilizing this Ramadan to provide food supplies to the poor across Yemen.
We distribute food items to poor families, and our target this year is to distribute 8,000 baskets of food, including flour, rice, sugar, oil, and dates.
Traditionally a time of fasting and feasting, this year's Ramadan feasts are becoming too expensive for the majority of Yemenis. Yemen has remained the poorest country in the Arab world, and since the country's political turmoil in 2011, in which President Ali Abdullah Saleh was deposed, things have gotten even worse. The GDP plunged more than 10% in 2011, and recovery has been slow ever since.
Yemen witnessed significant economic failure during the past decades, and this failure was the cause of the revolution that ended with the transitional phase. In this transitional period, economic development is almost halted.
For the average Yemeni, the economic slump has translated into a higher cost of living. Basic foodstuff is now out of reach for the average consumer. More than 50% of the population is now below the poverty line.
Life's becoming difficult. There's no breathing space. Nobody can afford to get enough, just the most necessary things.
With inflation and the increase in prices, I really cannot afford what we need for Ramadan.
Communal iftars, the meal that breaks the dawn to dusk fast, provides some respite from what would otherwise be a sparse Ramadan.
OK, stay with us throughout the day. I'll bring you continuous updates with all the news. You can keep up to date, of course, on the website as well at arise.tv and all the other usual channels. Thanks very much for watching.